Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Lovecraft Country episode 3. Let's talk about it. So things are really starting to heat up. Here in episode 3, we have a ton to talk about. But first of all, I unfortunately wasn't able to do my review for episode 2 last week because there was just so much going on. But let me tell you, that episode was incredible. Now, I still think that episode 1 has been the strongest so far, just in terms of the way that it's composed overall, the themes that were explored in that episode, the socio-political commentary there, and just the way that the whole episode was structured. It just built up the tension so well, especially considering we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into at that point. So I still think that once again episode 1 was just the strongest, but that certainly doesn't mean in the slightest that I think that this series isn't living up to episode 1. I just think that it was a great way to start off the series, and we are certainly going on this roller coaster of a journey because wow. The previous episode established so many important plot points for the series overall, which I found absolutely fascinating. I never would have guessed, after we saw the end of episode 1, I never would have guessed that episode 2 would take us to that direction. But all of a sudden we find ourselves in the midst of this cult, this white supremacist cult who believe in restoring the right way of things, whatever that means, right? You apparently have these incredibly important, powerful white men who are working behind the scenes to find the answer to eternal life. So that was the whole situation that was explored in episode 2 that I think laid down the groundwork for this entire season so well, whilst also being a great episode in its own right. And again, we get a little bit more of that sprinkled into the end of episode 3, where we see the daughter making an appearance, a surprise appearance, considering what happened at the end of episode 2. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about the main issue of this episode, and that was the haunted house. Now, this series is really interesting in that it's not just exploring one type of horror, it's exploring all of these different elements of horror. We have, monsters, we have cults and all of this cultish behavior, we have the supernatural, and of course we have ghosts and ghouls and the undead, and that was very much explored in this episode. Now, here's the thing. I've already made it crystal clear. I am a scaredy cat. I am afraid of everything. Of everything. The past 2 episodes haven't been too bad, okay? I've been managing. It's been okay. Like, I'm going to get through this. Episode 3 hits, and it's a haunted house, and no. I can't do ghosts. I can't do undead spirits. I can't do that. I cannot do jump scares. Please, no. This is where they lost me for sure. Now, of course, you see Letty has purchased herself a house in a white neighborhood in North Chicago. This is a big no-no at the time, and you can see that her new neighbors are very unwelcoming. They're trying to disrupt her existence by any means necessary because they want her out. They don't want her joining their neighborhood and bringing in other undesirables, so they're trying to make her existence there as incredibly uncomfortable as they possibly can. And this antagonism within the neighborhood kind of bubbles up until it reaches a crescendo at the party, where you have the burning cross on the lawn, and that is horrifying. And it makes it clear as day, if it wasn't already, that that town is nowhere near welcoming towards her or her people. Now, this episode, just like the other episodes in this season so far, is shrouded in mystery. And mystery number 1 that's explored here is, how was Letty able to afford this mansion? How was she able to purchase it? Because it must have been very expensive, even in the state that it was found in. Now, she kind of avoids the question. She kind of evades it when her sister asks her, until eventually she does disclose that she managed to get the money from her mother's inheritance. Now, Ruby was really surprised to hear this because apparently their mother didn't have much in terms of finances, and the fact that she left all of her money to Letty, it really upsets her. It really creates this divide between the sisters. Once again, it enhances that, especially considering the fact that you have Letty trying to reach out to her sister and, acknowledging all of the help that her sister has given her in the past and trying to, mend that bridge. All of a sudden, hearing that their mother apparently had this inheritance money and it all went to Letty, it just creates that division between them once again. But overall, the fact that Letty could afford this house to begin with was a mystery that pervades the entire episode. And it's at the very end that we find out, that we realize that there is a connection between the sons of Adam, here we go again, and Letty being able to purchase this house. We see that the realtor that sold Letty the house, JJ I believe his name was, he's packing his stuff away, he's done his job. And then we see the daughter, the blonde girl, I can't remember her name, but the blonde girl, she's there, she's looking super creepy, chic but creepy. And clearly she was involved in giving the money to Letty in order to allow her to purchase the house in the first place. So that's where this mysterious inheritance money came from. But it's made very clear that she wanted Letty to own that house. Clearly the sons of Adam are not done with Letty and the gang quite yet. So then we get to mystery number 2. Now this is where the horror elements of this episode really kicked in, because as soon as Letty moves in, it is made very, very clear that she's not the only presence in this house. Oh no, she is amongst the undead. Oh my god, that scene where she wakes up and her covers are being dragged away from her, absolutely not, absolutely not. And then you see the presence of this undead entity. No. Once again, I find myself reviewing this show in the middle of the night like a dummy. I'm not gonna be able to sleep tonight, whatever. Anyways, this house is haunted as hell. We see that through the lift or the elevator if you're American. The elevator doesn't work as an elevator, it works as a guillotine. And we see that near the end of the episode where one of the white guys who was there to vandalize Letty's home and do God knows what else ends up getting beheaded by the elevator, because of course he does. That thing is dangerous as hell. Now the origins of the ghosts themselves is hinted at the beginning of the episode, where we get that text that said that in 1955 a group of African Americans decided to move to a house in North Chicago, and they were very much unwelcomed, and we see that a few of them ended up disappearing in the house. Now it says they disappeared in the house, which is frightening, interesting, but it definitely acted as a great preface to this episode, because it's expanded upon when Letty finds out that a scientist used to live there, an astrophysicist used to live there, and he was experimenting on black people, and these were the people who ended up disappearing in that house. Now these people, when you see them manifested in this ghostly way, they look like they were hacked to bits. It is traumatizing. It is horrific. When you get past the fact that they're ghosts and they're terrifying because they're undead and they're haunting their house. What? And they've been caught, they've been manifested by this voodoo priestess. Listen, when you get past that part and you actually see the way that they were hacked to bits, and you see how a baby's head was put on an adult's body, you see how this man had no eye, his eye was removed, his hand was chopped up to bits. It is just heartbreaking to even imagine this idea that these black people were experimented on and treated as lab rats, because this scientist didn't see them as human, he saw them as subhuman and just subjects for his experimentations. And then you add the fact that he turns out to be a follower of the sons of Adam, and it's just... But going back to the ghosts themselves, I think that was the true horror. And again, this series does that so well, where it presents these horror elements, these Lovecraftian elements to you, and they're horrific, they're scary, they're terrifying in their own right, but then you also have the racism, and time again the racism proves to be the most horrific element of this story overall. Now, speaking of the racism in this story, what this show does really, really well is highlights the real life struggles and plights and suffering of African Americans in America during this time, and even in the past as well. We saw that in episode 2, where we find out that Tick's ancestor was a slave, and she had a child with her slave owner who was very friendly towards his slave. Listen, when that guy said that, I was like, wow, okay, that's where this story is headed. Okay. So this show is constantly presenting to us the real life struggles and the real life oppression of black people in America, and it's kind of enveloping all of that into this Lovecraftian story. And again, it is subverting the genre of Lovecraftian horror, because if you look at the backstory of Lovecraft himself, he was a racist, he was a top tier racist. So in that way, it's very much challenging his ideology, whilst at the same time borrowing from his worlds, his creatures, his lore, and creating a whole new world, a whole new story that's been recontextualized. And we see this once again in episode 3 with the experimentation on these black peoples. We know from history that black slaves were often experimented on. They were used and abused, and we see this as well in the field of gynecology, where it has been shown that a lot of black female slaves were used and experimented on in order to broaden the knowledge surrounding gynecology, because a lot of these experimentations would not have taken place on white women who were seen as whole people, as opposed to the black women who were seen as 2/3 of a person. Listen. And so this dehumanization of black people meant that the scientific community felt justified. They felt like they had the legitimate reason to experiment on black people as opposed to white people. And don't get it twisted, this didn't just stop in the 18th and 19th century, because we saw the similar thing happening with Henrietta Lacks, who brought us so much knowledge when it came to the field of biology and biochemistry with her cells, which were involuntarily taken from her by the scientific community. So those are the themes that play out throughout this episode, and I think they were very well explored, especially when you see the true monster, the true evil that was inhabiting in this house, and that was the ghost of the scientist himself, and the way that he manifests in this grotesque, horrific way. And when Letty is trying to exorcise him from the house, and you see how she is just giving it everything that she has, it is taking every single power within her to exorcise him. It is just such a powerful, horrific, but powerful scene, and I think it just represented so much in terms of her reclaiming this house and using it in order to better her community, as opposed to the way that he used it to torture them. And I think it's even more powerful when we see that as the ghost of the white scientist kind of disappears and he is exorcised from that house, we see that the black ghosts, his victims, they become more re-energized, and they take on the form of the people that they were before they had been experimented upon and treated as subhuman animals even. Another point of commentary that this storyline touches upon rather briefly but still powerfully is the complicity of the police force, and we see that during the party sequence where Letty is letting it all out, which, by the way, she looked incredible. She was amazing. I think Journey Smollett is incredible in this series just overall, but that whole scene where she is trashing those cars, she's breaking the glass and taking out the bricks that were there in order to kind of honk the horn for ages on end. She was so good in that sequence. I felt her anger. And side note to my side note, I absolutely adored her dress. The color was incredible on her, and the movement of the fringes as she was bashing in those cars was amazing. Oh, there are some beautiful stylistic choices in this series just all around, but that dress that she wore at the party, mwah, chef's kiss to the costuming department. Anyways, back to my initial point, we do see the complicity of the police once again, as it was explored in episode 1 with the sheriff, but this time round they drive by, no questions asked, as they witness acts of racism, of terrorism happening in their own neighborhood, because of course it's the white residents that are acting against the undesirables, so they do absolutely nothing about it. And even worse, when they do manage to capture Letty after she does that act of violence because she was just so angry, they are so happy, they are delighted. Talk about the cat that got the cream. Wow, they are so happy to have a reason to lock her up, and you can see it in that captain's eyes because he is so full of hate. And not to mention, it's revealed that he was an associate or a friend of the white scientist who was experimenting on those black victims, and as a result he helped cover up so many of these missing persons reports and these investigations because he was helping him out, because they're all part of this Sons of Adam situation. But it just shows the complicity of the police, especially in real life today. We see a lot of that discussion being had with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think it ties in very well with the whole history of the police and the fact that they were founded initially to help round up slaves and runaway slaves, and that whole background definitely fits in well with the narrative that is explored on this show. Another small tidbit that this episode touches upon is kind of like a narrative expansion, and that is more of an insight into Letty's backstory. Now, we already got a bit of a description of Letty's relationship with her mother in the previous episode, where she talks about how her mum was just, you know, on and off. She would come and go, and she wasn't a very caring and present mother in her childhood, and so her relationship with her mother was always quite antagonistic and problematic. But in this episode, with just one little turn of phrase, we get a bit more of an insight into Letty and Ruby's relationship biologically, because Letty says early on in this episode, when one guy is trying to pursue Ruby and she slams the door in her face, that Ruby gets her manners from her father, which tells me that Letty and Ruby may not have the same father, and it is most likely that Ruby's father is of a deeper complexion than Letty's, and perhaps Letty's father is a white man. Now, I hope that they're going to explore this further in this season, because I already said in episode 1 that it was notable that Letty and Ruby have very different complexions, and I hope that it's something that they are going to explore rather than something that they just kind of saw as a casting choice, because that would be quite problematic and colorist for this series to cast a lead with a lighter complexion and just have no explanation for it. And finally, another little tidbit that we get right at the end of this episode, as the daughter, the blonde woman, is talking about, you know, her father's legacy and the fact that her father had to take down one of his spells, his only spell that he had, which was invulnerability, in order to create that whole situation that happened in the end of episode 2. Listen, I'm not that deep into mysticism and supernatural elements like that, so you'll have to forgive me if I don't know the exact process of this ritual, but during the ritual he had to let go of one of his spells that was invulnerability, and as a result I guess he's dead. Like, I guess that's what she's saying, like he's dead forever. But she is on the pursuit, she's on the hunt for one of the missing pages from one of the other sons of Adam, the one that was admired by the white scientist who owned the house that Letitia just bought. Anyways, there's a whole bunch of pages that are missing from the book of Adam or something, and if they were to be found, they would help encode the language of Adam so they could help the sons of Adam take over the world and find eternal life, whatever. That's not the aspect of the story that I'm particularly interested in. I'm following along, but I'm just not into that kind of mysticism and horror and supernatural elements type of thing, so you'll have to forgive me if I don't know the specifics of the situation, but we get more of an insight into what's going to happen on that front as well in this episode. Oh, and I completely forgot to mention as well, in the previous episode we saw the death of Uncle George, which totally broke my heart. I was really sad to see that character go. I think he was absolutely phenomenal. Maybe we'll see more of him though. Maybe he's not gone forever, because we see the kids who are playing with that Ouija board, which, by the way, those kids playing with the Ouija board, what? What? So anyways, they're playing with the Ouija board and they managed to spell out the name George on the board by some spirit, which I'm guessing is George. So who knows, we might see his reappearance soon. But in terms of the handling of his death in episode 3, I think it was interesting. It was really absent. Like, things had kind of moved on because it had been 3 weeks since he died and since the funeral and everything. So we didn't really dive in deep in terms of the immediate aftermath of his death, but it was very much felt. I think the characters were still very much mourning, especially of course his wife, who definitely wants answers because she feels like not everything is as it seems when it comes to his death. So now that I told you guys my thoughts on Lovecraft Country, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this episode down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.